The night Lagos glittered with neon lights and honking danfos weaving through Victoria Island. The prestigious Afritech Awards was unfolding like a play meant only for the rich and ruthless. And in that hall of mirrors and chandeliers stood Zainab Z. Lawal, a young woman with a wide frame, big dreams, and a heart that had carried too much humiliation already. Beside her, arm wrapped loosely around her shoulder as if he were holding a handbag rather than a human being, was Kunle Adeyemi, one of the city's youngest millionaires, celebrated for building an app that promised to discipline lifestyles, yet built on a foundation of vanity and arrogance. And in that moment, when the cameras turned, he leaned into the microphone, smiled that polished smile that sold shares and dreams, and when teased about marriage, he laughed and said with cruel precision, "No, abeg, I can't tie myself down to a woman who doesn't fit the brand. I need a partner who looks like success." And though the crowd half laughed, half cringed, the humiliation seared Z's skin deeper than any slap. For he had not only dismissed her love, but reduced her worth to body size in front of the world. She wanted the ground to swallow her, but instead she stood frozen, lips trembling, the cameras catching the heartbreak in her eyes before cutting to applause for Kunle's boldness. And as the music swelled and he shook hands with investors, she slipped out into the humid night, her heels clacking on concrete, until she yanked them off and walked barefoot toward a waiting Uber that smelled faintly of petrol and stale fries, her mind racing with shame and rage. On the ride back to Ajeji, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Aisha, her loyal friend, calling, her aunt Aya Malika sending psalm verses, trolls flooding her DMs with mockery, gifs of fat women stumbling, hashtags comparing her to the wrong brand for a CEO. And though her chest heaved with unshed tears, she refused to cry in the back seat of a stranger's car, not yet. When she reached her cramped flat, she collapsed against the door, finally allowing sobs to crash through her like waves, remembering the boyish Kunle she had first met at Unilag, back when he was nobody and she lent him transport money, remembering how he once called her my balance, my peace, words that now sounded like mockery echoing in the silence. And as she pressed her palms to her swollen face, something inside her broke, but not into despair, into resolve, a quiet storm forming. She went to her small desk, opened a notebook stained with palm oil, and scrawled 3 words with the fury of someone who had been branded disposable: health, skill, power. They were not promises to lose weight for a man or for the world's cruel laughter. They were anchors she clutched to keep from drowning. She told herself that she would rise, not with loud revenge, but with steady transformation. That she would take back every ounce of dignity stripped from her in that ballroom, and if destiny allowed, one day Kunle Adeyemi would look at her not as an afterthought, but as the reminder of what arrogance always destroys. The night hummed with generator buzz, mosquitoes singing near the net, and as Z finally drifted into restless sleep, barefoot and heartbroken, her body shaking from exhaustion, the city outside carried on, oblivious to the birth of a decision that would change more than just one woman's life. It would rewrite what it meant to be underestimated in a world that worshipped thinness, money, and power. And though the road ahead was paved with pain, betrayal, and a vengeance that might cost her more than she imagined, the first step had been taken that night, quietly, in a small Ajeji flat where a humiliated woman chose not to die of shame, but to rise with scars sharp enough to cut down the man who thought her body made her unworthy. Morning broke in Agej with the sound of muezzins calling from the mosque, hawkers shouting Agej bread, hot Agej bread, and children clattering along the dusty street on their way to school. But inside her small flat, Zainab Z. Lawal sat on the edge of her bed staring at the notebook where she had written those 3 words, health, skill, power, as if they were both prophecy and punishment. And though her body still ached from the humiliation of the night before, her spirit hardened with a kind of fire that fear could not quench. She dialed her best friend Aisha, who rushed over carrying akara and ginger tea, and instead of pitying her, Aisha clapped her hands and declared, "We move! If he mocked you in public, let's answer him in public too, but with results, not tears." And together they mapped a wall of sticky notes that covered the peeling paint. Doctor checkup, nutrition plan, walking club at the local field, therapy to unburden her shame, and even business sketches from Z's forgotten love for fashion design, a gift she once nurtured in secondary school, but had buried under low self-esteem. That afternoon, at the community clinic, a nurse calmly explained how small swaps could change her life. Replace puff puff with roasted plantain, fried rice with jollof made from brown rice, reduce soft drinks, drink water, and above all be patient, because the journey was not a sprint, but a steady climb. And when Z stepped into the dusty field at Surulere later that week, Coach Bayo, a barrel-chested trainer with a whistle and jokes for every excuse, welcomed her without mockery, guiding her through walking laps, resistance bands under the shade of a mango tree, and simple planks that made her laugh at her own wobbling, laughter that felt like freedom for the first time since Kunle's betrayal. Yet the night still pressed hard on her chest, the viral clips of Kunle's brand partner remark replayed across Twitter, Facebook, and gossip blogs, memes of her body circulating with cruelty so sharp it could slice skin, and though she wanted to curl into silence, each time she looked at her sticky notes, she forced herself to rise, to prepare her meals with intention, to push her body an extra lap, to journal her anger into paragraphs that sounded less like pain and more like prayer. Slowly her body began to respond, not with dramatic changes, but with resilience, her breath steadying, her stamina growing, her sleep deeper, and along with it, her mind sharpened toward the dream she once buried, to create fashion that honored women's bodies without shame, to build a brand where curves were not accommodated, but celebrated as the origin of design. And as she sketched wrap dresses, palazzo trousers, and Ankara tops that balanced elegance with comfort, she whispered, "Nyala, not your afterthought, Lagos Atelier," the name of a business that would one day carry her revenge, not as venom, but as vision. But in those early weeks, her revenge was still silent, her heart still trembling, for every time she scrolled past Kunle's face on billboards promoting his app that preached discipline, she clenched her jaw and muttered, "Discipline? You will see discipline." The city around her, chaotic, merciless, hungry, seemed to mirror her own transformation. Rough roads patched by resilience, buildings collapsing yet people still rising at dawn to hustle. At night, she dreamed of standing on a stage where Kunle once mocked her, not in his shadow, but in her own light. And though she did not yet know the depth of tragedy her hunger for revenge would bring, she believed with every beat of her heart that pain was temporary, but dignity, once reclaimed, could become immortal.
Weeks melted into months, marked not by calendars, but by the steady rhythm of change echoing in Zainab's body and spirit. Mornings found her at the Surulere field, where dawn mist clung to the grass as she marched through laps, while Coach Bayo barked encouragement, "Push, Z, you day stronger than yesterday." And evenings brought her back to her tiny Ageje flat, where sketchbooks piled on the table, each page blooming with bold Ankara designs that refused to shrink curves but celebrated them like royalty, while Aisha filmed behind-the-scenes clips for Instagram that slowly began to attract women who saw in Z a reflection of themselves, women tired of being invisible in fashion's cold spotlight. By the third month, her body moved with new ease, her steps lighter, her laughter freer, and though she had not yet become the slim silhouette Kunle once demanded, she carried herself with a confidence so radiant that it turned heads at the market and silenced gossiping tongues. And when she finally unveiled her first collection under the name Nyala at a small Yaba kiosk sublet from a hair salon, the response was electric. Bankers and bakers, mothers and students, women who had been told they were too much for beauty, lined up to twirl in wrap dresses that hugged without suffocating. And one customer, an older woman with silver-streaked braids, cried in front of the mirror, whispering, "This is the first time I've seen myself beautiful in 30 years." Words that struck Z's heart like a drumbeat of purpose. Soon, Nyala's Instagram filled with videos of women dancing, smiling, reclaiming joy. And though the orders were modest, the impact was immense. Each satisfied client leaving with not only fabric, but fire. And Z realized that her revenge was not merely weight loss or personal success. It was the empire of dignity she was building thread by thread. Yet behind the victories lurked shadows of unresolved rage, for Kunle's face still dominated billboards across Victoria Island, his company launching wellness campaigns with slogans like "Discipline is power," mocking echoes of the night he discarded her. And each time she saw his smug smile, she whispered, "You built your empire on humiliation, but I'll build mine on truth, and when we meet again, you will bow before what you despised." The city seemed to conspire with her dreams, bustling danfos carrying women in Nyala dresses, church choirs where her designs appeared on Sundays, whispers of her name on blogs that praised her bold inclusivity. And though she was still climbing, Z felt the winds of destiny shift. One evening, scrolling her phone while sipping ginger tea, she gasped at an email from the AfriStyle Expo, the continent's largest fashion gathering, inviting Nyala to showcase in the emerging inclusive brand pavilion, a stage glittering with opportunity and danger, for it meant stepping into the same arena where Kunle's tech empire often paraded, a collision inevitable. Her heart thundered, torn between fear and fire, but Aisha clasped her hand and said, "This is it, Z, your chance not only to rise, but to confront the world that mocked you." And though she smiled faintly, deep down she wondered if revenge was guiding her steps more than purpose, if the fire she carried was warming her or slowly consuming her. And in that thought lay the seed of tragedy, unseen, but already sprouting.
The day of the AfriStyle Expo arrived like a storm dressed in sequins, with Lagos traffic snarling outside Echo Hotel and Suites, while inside the convention center the air buzzed with flashbulbs, Afro beats, and the perfume of ambition. And in one corner stood the Nyla booth, draped in bold Ankara prints, mannequins clothed in dresses that swayed like ocean tides, and a team of tailors and friends who believed in Zainab more than she sometimes believed in herself. When she stepped into the spotlight wearing a flowing indigo gown cinched with a gold sash, the crowd hushed, cameras angled, and murmurs rippled. Is that Z Lawal, the same woman Kunle embarrassed? But this time, the whispers carried awe instead of mockery, for her body, though slimmer, was not the stick-thin ideal tabloids worshipped, but a powerful, graceful frame that radiated confidence. And in her eyes burned a fire that refused erasure. Women flocked to her booth, journalists scribbled notes, bloggers live-streamed fittings, and when a viral video captured a plus-size banker twirling joyfully in Nyla trousers, orders exploded online, pushing her small brand into the global conversation overnight. In the midst of the whirlwind, a woman in a towering galette approached, Madame Funke Balugan, one of Lagos's most feared and respected investors, her presence as commanding as thunderclouds. And she looked at Z with an assessing gaze before saying, "You design with mercy, and mercy sells longer than vanity. Send me your deck. Let's talk expansion." And those words struck Z like a blessing, a validation she had long craved. But nestled within them was a seed of danger. For the bigger she grew, the closer her orbit circled back toward Kunle, whose company also had a booth at the expo, plastered with glossy billboards screaming, "Discipline is power." And it was inevitable that their paths would cross. She spotted him across the hall, tall in his white agbada, embroidered with gold, laughing with sponsors, his eyes briefly flicking to her booth before quickly darting away, a twitch of recognition betraying discomfort. And though she lifted her chin and smiled for the cameras, inside her chest a storm raged, half fueled by triumph, half by vengeance. For she did not want only success. She wanted Kunle to choke on regret, to crumble before the woman he called not fit for the brand. And it was in that unquenchable hunger for his humiliation that the first crack in her soul widened. As night fell and she sat in her flat counting orders, her phone buzzing with congratulations, she told herself she was finally winning, finally proving that her scars could become crowns. But the truth lingered like smoke. This was no longer just about her healing or her brand.
It was about destroying Kunle Adeyemi. And though she thought she was holding the blade, fate was quietly turning it against her hand.
Success moved fast, too fast, like Lagos traffic at midnight when no LASTMA officer is watching. And before Zainab could catch her breath, Nyala was everywhere, on Instagram reels, in church groups, whispered in corporate boardrooms by women tired of squeezing into imported sizes that mocked their shapes. And though Madame Punke's investment brought machines, staff, and a studio in Surulere, it also brought scrutiny, gossip, and enemies, chief among them Kunle Adeyemi, who sat in his Victoria Island office, scrolling through viral clips of Z's runway at AfriStyle Expo, his jaw tight, his pride bleeding. The man who once laughed at her body was now watching her rise, and instead of humility, it stirred something darker, a fear that his own empire, built on discipline, would crumble under the weight of her message of inclusion. So he began to move against her quietly, buying bloggers to write that Nyala's designs encouraged laziness, sending trolls to attack her pages with fatphobic comments, even bribing suppliers to delay her Ankara shipments. But each time she fought back with more resilience, her team rallying around her like soldiers, her customers louder than her critics. Still, the poison of revenge was spreading in Z's veins, for instead of focusing solely on building, she started obsessing over Kunle's downfall, rehearsing speeches she would one day deliver on a stage where he would be forced to kneel, imagining headlines that would declare him finished. Aisha noticed the shift, warning, Z, don't let him live rent-free in your head. This journey was supposed to heal you, not consume you. But Z only smiled tightly, whispering, no, this journey ends when he feels what I felt. As if the universe conspired with tragedy, a corporate wellness company approached Nyala for a collaboration, and when she arrived at the negotiation table, she realized it was a subsidiary of Kunle's firm, meaning he had to face her at last. But instead of declining, she leaned into it, demanding terms designed not just for profit, but for his humiliation. Public apologies, body-positive campaigns, and clauses that forced his brand to admit past harm. Kunle agreed with a strained smile, but behind the scenes he plotted deeper sabotage, leaking rumors that Z's weight loss was unnatural, paid for with surgeries she could never afford. And when those lies caught traction, it reopened old wounds. Women began to question if she had truly built her transformation with discipline or if she had simply bought her revenge. Her heart cracked as she scrolled through comments accusing her of hypocrisy. And though she knew the truth, the shame gnawed at her like termites in wood. Yet instead of retreating, she doubled down, working herself past exhaustion, sleeping 3 hours a night, forcing her body into punishing workouts not for health but for vengeance, until even Aisha shook her head in despair, whispering to Iya Mulika, she is winning, yes, but she is bleeding while she wins. And in that quiet confession lay the tragedy blooming. For the victory she once dreamed of was already turning into the curse she could not escape.
The night of the Nyala x Adeyemi Tech collaboration launch burned bright under Lagos skies. Freedom Park transformed into a stage where drummers rolled, dancers leaped in athleisure stitched with Ankara panels, and a giant LED screen flashed slogans of wellness for everybody. Journalists swarmed, influencers live-streamed, and the atmosphere pulsed with victory. But beneath the glamour lay the brittle bones of vengeance. For Zainab stood backstage, her heart pounding not with pride, but with anticipation of Kunle's public humiliation. The clause she had demanded now seconds away from unfolding, a clause that forced him to apologize on record for shaming women's bodies. When he stepped on stage in a pristine white agbada, the crowd roared, and he began with the words she thought she had longed to hear. I was wrong. I hurt people. I disrespected women who deserve dignity. But instead of satisfaction, Z felt something hollow stir in her chest, as if the apology was a play scripted for optics, his eyes flickering not with remorse but calculation. And when her turn came to speak, she stepped forward, wrapped in a Nyala tracksuit that gleamed under the floodlights, and thundered, "We are not fixing bodies, we are fixing stories. because no woman should ever be told she is unworthy of love or success because of her size. The crowd erupted. Hashtags trended. But even in the middle of the storm, she saw Kunle smirk, faint but mocking, reminding her that though he had bent, he had not broken. Later that night, alone in her Surulere studio, she scrolled through the coverage expecting joy, but instead finding venom. Headlines praising Kunle's bravery, blogs giving him credit for leading a new era of inclusivity, while comments under Nyala's posts accused her of being nothing more than his pawn, a woman whose success existed only because of the man who once rejected her. Her breath hitched, her chest tightened, and for the first time she wondered if all her hard work had been swallowed by his shadow, if her empire was just an extension of his narrative. She slammed her phone onto the table, tears blurring her vision, rage clawing at her throat, and whispered, "No, this is not what I fought for. This is not my revenge." But the truth loomed like a curse. Her obsession with bringing Kunle to his knees had chained her destiny to his forever. And in that moment, she realized she had not escaped him at all. She had only built a throne beside his, one that history would say he gifted her through apology and partnership. Outside, Lagos nightlife rumbled on. Donfos honked, hawkers shouted, but in Z's flat, the silence was suffocating. Her once bright sticky notes curling at the edges, her notebooks heavy with designs that now felt meaningless. And though she had risen from humiliation to empire, the climax of her revenge revealed the cruelest truth of all. She had won the battle, but in the eyes of the world she was still standing in his shadow, and no amount of fabric, fitness, or fire could wash that stain away.
The weeks after the launch crawled like shadows across Zainab's soul. Each headline another knife twisting in her chest. Each interview where Kunle was praised for championing inclusivity, a reminder that the narrative had slipped from her hands. And though NYALA sales soared, though orders poured in from Nairobi, Accra, and Johannesburg, she no longer felt triumph, but torment. For every bolt of Ankara fabric reminded her of his smirk. Every viral clip of women dancing in her designs seemed to echo with his name. Exhaustion sank into her bones as she pushed herself harder, slashing sleep to 3 hours, barking at her tailors, snapping at Aisha, who eventually stormed out shouting, "You're killing yourself for him, not for you." And those words hung in the air like a curse, because deep down, Z knew they were true, that her success had become a mirror still reflecting Kunle's image. She stopped eating properly, punishing her body with brutal workouts, chasing a perfection that was never hers to claim, her once glowing skin turning dull, her laughter a memory that lived only in Aisha's worried recollections. One night, while fitting a client in the Surulere studio, she collapsed, fainting hard against the sewing table. And when she woke in the clinic, the doctor warned her sternly that her body was breaking under the weight of stress, malnutrition, and overexertion, urging her to rest, to recalibrate. But she only smiled weakly, nodding, then returned to work the very next day, driven by a compulsion she could no longer name. The tragedy deepened when Madame Funke, once her fiercest supporter, began to distance herself, murmuring that investors feared Z was too emotional, too erratic, while whispers in the market suggested that Kunle had quietly spread rumors of her instability. Slowly, painfully, contracts slipped away, collaboration stalled, and though NYALA still had clients, the empire she dreamed of was crumbling, not because of Kunle's sabotage alone, but because she could not let go of him. Because every design, every campaign, every headline was secretly a battle waged against a ghost. Late one evening, standing alone on the balcony of her flat, she stared out over the sprawl of Lagos, the yellow donfos darting through chaos, the scent of roasted corn rising from the street, and for the first time she admitted to herself, in a whisper barely louder than the night breeze, "I wanted him to suffer.
but I only destroyed myself. Tears rolled down her cheeks, hot and relentless, not just for Kunle, not just for the revenge that hollowed her, but for the woman she might have been if she had chosen healing instead of hatred. She thought of the girl in Agege who once wrote 3 words, health, skill, power, and realized she had traded them all for a hunger that could never be fed.
The end came not with a scream, but with silence, the kind that swallows a city as loud as Lagos and leaves only the hum of generators, the distant blare of a Danfo horn, the faint cry of a hawker pushing groundnuts at midnight. Zainab sat alone in her Surulere studio, the once vibrant space now dim, bolts of fabric piled like abandoned dreams, mannequins draped in half-finished dresses staring at her like mute witnesses. And on the table before her lay 2 newspapers, one praising Kunle Adeyeme's remarkable pivot into inclusivity, and another speculating whether Nyala was losing direction under pressure. And as she traced the words with trembling fingers, she felt the weight of her revenge settle finally and fully on her chest, crushing not only her body, but her spirit. She had fought, risen, transformed, and built, but all of it had been tethered to a man she claimed to despise, until she could no longer tell where her victories ended and his shadow began. Ayesha had stopped visiting, exhausted by trying to save a friend who no longer wanted saving. Madame Funke had cut ties, investors had pulled out, and the community that once hailed her as a hero now whispered pity, asking in hushed tones how someone who burned so brightly could fade so fast. Her body, once healthier, was now worn down by obsession, skin pale, hands shaking, eyes ringed with exhaustion. And yet she still sketched, still scribbled notes for campaigns she swore would outshine Kunle, though the lines wavered, the pages tore beneath the pressure of her pen, as if even the paper was weary of carrying her war. And in that final night, as the rain tapped gently against the corrugated roof, she whispered the truth aloud, to the empty room, to the mannequins, to herself. I wanted revenge, but revenge wanted me too. And with those words, she finally understood that she had not beaten Kunle, she had only chained herself to him until the end. When morning came, the staff arrived to find her slumped over the work table, sketches scattered beneath her cheek, her breathing shallow, but her eyes closed as though she had fallen asleep in battle. And though they rushed her to the hospital, though doctors fought to revive the strength she had bled away, by sunset the news spread across Lagos like wildfire. Zainab Lawal, founder of Nyala, dead at 29, survived by a legacy of beauty and pain. The headlines that followed were cruel in their irony, crediting Kunle again as the man who inspired her movement, twisting her tragedy into his triumph, erasing the truth of her fire. And in the end, her revenge had not destroyed him, but devoured her, leaving the world to ask questions she could no longer answer. Did she deserve this ending, or had she chosen it the moment she let hatred guide her steps? As the city moved on, as Danfos rattled, as hawkers shouted, as new names trended online, her story remained like a cautionary drumbeat echoing in the minds of those who remembered. In chasing vengeance, she had lost herself. And the cruelest tragedy was not that she died, but that she died still standing in the shadow of the man who broke her. Do you think Zainab deserved this ending? Or was she only a victim of a crueler game? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the darkest sides of love, pride, and revenge.